Fellow members, I am hopeful that everybody recognizes our next speaker, Sue Verhoef, who is the Director of Oral Histories as part of the Veterans History Project. If you don't know Sue, you need to meet her before you leave here today. She is here to talk to us about the kickoff of our memorabilia collection plan. And I want to recognize our first contributor, Roger Soyset. Please stand up in the back here. Roger started the project for us. So Roger, thank you. He is an infantry soldier, and as they say in infantry, follow me. So let me tell you what's happening, though. The people signing up, if we don't get everybody involved right now, it's all aviators and Marines. So we need some Air Force guys, a few Navy guys. Ed Woods has agreed to donate the hammer he used in Vietnam as part of the Seabees, so we're looking forward to that. But Sue has committed to get this project done for us. We are the only Vietnam group that they're working with. There is 110 people sitting in the room here today. There's another 209 that didn't make it that don't show up, but we're going to count on also. So the people in this room could put that collection together, so we need your support. So let me bring back Sue, who will be a frequent guest here. Sue Verhoef, Director of Oral Histories at Atlanta History Center. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. You'll pardon my phone here. I'm going to set the timer. I promised I would only take about 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to hold to that. As Max very ably mentioned, this is the memorabilia collecting plan that we have going at the Atlanta History Center. As most of you know, the Veterans History Project, we've been working on that since 1999, and we've got 600 interviews in the collection now. About half of them are up online from veterans of all of the wars from World War II forward. I feel very strongly that that project would have died in the water many, many moons ago had it not been for the constant and unfailing support of the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. So give yourselves a hand for being interviewed, for being interviewers, for helping out with all manner of activities with regard to that. The way we put it at the History Center is if you don't tell your story, who will? So this project, collecting the stuff that you may have brought back with you from Vietnam, goes hand in hand with that. If you don't tell your story, who will? If the History Center doesn't preserve your stuff, who will? And your stuff tells an important story. One quick World War II example is back at the table that I'm sitting at back there. When I say stuff, it doesn't necessarily need to be a three-dimensional object. It can be a photograph or a service record or any kind of paperwork that you brought back with you. An example of that would be my dad's World War II V-mail. It's a blown-up version of it, but I've got it in a frame back there at the table to kind of remind me of the stories that can be told by this stuff that you have. So with Ed's kind indulgence, let me have you advance the slide here. As an example, we're going to use Roger. Roger's a perfect leader for this. He brought this artifact to the Atlanta History Center a number of years ago. And we felt like it was a compelling artifact. If you look at it on the screen, Ed, you can advance it one more. Those are two different views of this artifact. It's a hammock. Okay, so the artifact is cool, a hammock, cool to look at, right? But is that enough just to see that on the screen? Is that compelling on the screen just looking at that? Probably not. What does it need to go with it? It needs a story. It needs a story. So Ed, if you can, the story. So here is Roger's story. He had been interviewed for the Veterans History Project a number of years ago, and I don't remember if he talked about the hammock during that interview, but we asked him to come back because we wanted him to discuss this particular artifact. So here is Roger talking about that. Assuming the technology works. Ed, if you need to minimize that and do the video directly, do that. It worked this morning in the office. It never works when you put it up on the screen. There we go. All right.
This hammock is a North Vietnamese construction made out of parachute. It's nylon, very lightweight. The U.S. Army had a hammock of the day. It actually came with a frame. I think it weighed about 20 pounds, extremely bulky, and if anybody tried to carry that in the field, they were an idiot. Whereas this North Vietnamese very lightweight version was kind of ideal, provided you aren't too heavy, and they weren't. But they would wrap the cord around a tree with just a friction knot, so that if they had to leave in a hurry, all they do is just one yank and roll it, and they're gone. So whereas we'd probably spend 20 minutes breaking camp, they're gone in like 20 seconds. One of the differences between the two armies. The way it was acquired, I came into possession of it in January 1970, when the personal belongings of my successor as platoon leader had been hit by our artillery, Sergeant Tom Massey. Well, he had a piece of shrapnel that went through one side, through his liver, and lodged between the breastbone and the heart. You know, it sounds almost fatal. And in fact, if infection got him, it would have been fatal. But I was amazed 2 days later, I was able to go visit the guy in the field hospital, and there he is standing around, pushing his IV around, one arm in a brace out to one side, looking pretty skinny, but still had sense of humor. He suddenly was gone, sent on to better treatment in a place with less infection. You know, probably Japan, I don't know. That was one of the things about when people left there, they tended to just disappear. I tried to find him and couldn't. So here I am with some of his personal belongings, including that hammock, and nowhere to send him. And years later, all the other things had been shipped off to I don't know where, but I decided I'm going to keep that hammock and I'm going to find him and get it to him. Never could find him until I found out about him about a year ago. I finally got in touch with his widow. He died about 10 years earlier. So the hammock artifact is now being passed on to the History Center, and a little comparison of artifacts between, if you get one from the U.S. Army, I guarantee you it's going to be a screamer, because that thing, as I say, is big, bulky, heavy, and just not practical. The North Vietnamese solved their problem with probably some of our own parachutes. The thing was dyed a dark, kind of a bluish green color, and probably weighed less than a pound. Just amazing, and yet it could support a full-grown person.
Were you ever aware of how he acquired the hammock? Did that story ever?
Just after an ambush, we considered anything that belonged to the other guys to be up for grabs. It was our stuff unless it had intelligence value, in which case we turn it over to military intelligence, which was always kind of a dead end because we never got any feedback on what we'd sent them. That was always a little frustration.
Okay. So just in that short clip, we've identified a number of stories that we could tell with that hammock. Perhaps first and foremost, the difference between the two armies, how the North Vietnamese handled the issue of sleeping arrangements and moving in a hurry, as opposed to how the United States forces did it. But there are other stories that can be told also. The story of medical care. How medical care worked, how those kinds of injuries could be treated so quickly. The story of how, as Roger puts it, people disappeared so quickly. One day you're there, one day you're not. The story of how Roger spent all those years trying to find information about his comrade, Massey, and how we actually ended up finally finding the widow after this man had passed away. Many of you I know have tried to reconnect with comrades with whom you served. But also the story of battlefield stuff. Who does it belong to when that North Vietnamese soldier didn't need it anymore? Who does it go to? And why does that happen? How does that happen? So multiple stories that we can tell that shed light on the experience of being in Vietnam and serving in Vietnam just with that one simple artifact. But the artifact isn't enough. It's got to have a story to go with it. So you take the artifact and you take the story, and now you've got the beginnings of an exhibition. So let me tell you just a little bit about that. We're not sure what it's going to look like. We're not sure when it's going to open. We're not sure how that's all going to come together yet. Some of those decisions belong in pay grades a little bit higher than mine. But I can tell you that with all of the pay grade force that I do have, we are going to have a Vietnam exhibition, And if I have anything to say about it, it's going to open in time for the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive. This is my goal. And we are hoping, oh, this is you. I'm hoping for this to be an exhibition that will be a full-on exhibition, not in a couple of display cases in the cyclorama, which is something that we're also talking about, but a full-on exhibition in the Archives Gallery that would run from late fall 2017 through March of 2018. And we can tell all kinds of stories in that space. All kinds of stories. So to give you a little bit of an idea what that kind of looks like, if I can have Ed advance to the next slide. This is a brand new exhibition. Many of you may have heard of it or seen it. This is Gather Round, Stories of Atlanta. And this particular part of the exhibition wall is a timeline. That's one way to tell a story. What we may be doing in our Vietnam exhibition may not be a timeline. We may be thematic. You know, those are all decisions that we'll all make together. But in this particular case, it's a timeline. And so this is Atlanta in the 1940s. And you've got an image to the left, very powerful, compelling image of a woman leaping from the Weinkauf Hotel during the Weinkauf Hotel fire. But if you notice right next to it, and sandwiched in between it and the picture of the Gone with the Wind premiere, you've got a knapsack. That knapsack belonged to William Bryan. He was a correspondent who was embedded in units during D-Day, who wrote home. He was from Atlanta, and he wrote home to Atlanta about what that was like. We have interviews of his wife, and I think maybe even a daughter for the Veterans History Project, talking about, you know, what life was like in Atlanta during World War II. But we've also got his knapsack. The family just recently donated a cap that he wore, as I understand it, in a prisoner of war camp, but also some other materials from his time in service. So that's a great way to tell a quick story. And Ed, if you can go to the next slide. This is an older exhibition. Some of you may have seen this. This was kind of one of the things that got the Veterans History Project off the ground at the History Center. It's called V for Victory, and it was about Georgia during World War II. So this is just a sample of a case, and in this particular case, you've got uniform objects and other things that tell that story. Again, that's a very old exhibition case, so we probably would not use that format today. We would not use those colors. We wouldn't be cramming those things together. We've learned a lot about how to put on exhibitions over the years. But this is what we're looking for. And if you turn it to the next slide for me, please, Ed. We can't do this without you. And I am just about out of time, but I want to tell you one more quick story. I had a quick chat with Kerry King a number of months ago about his children. He's talked to his kids about the possibility of donating a very important artifact in his life. And I'm not going to tell you that story because he needs to tell that. So it's a fascinating story. But his kids were concerned because they were afraid that once that artifact left the family, it was gone. Two quick stories for you just to be thinking about, and I think I've told one of these before. Working the library reference desk one day, I had a woman come in with a box of materials. She stuck it on the counter. She said, "My next door neighbor died 2 weeks ago, and when I went to work this morning, this box was in the trash. Do you want it?" So I opened the lid, and there were his medals, his cruise book, his service records, photographs, all manner of information. Now, whether or not his kids weren't interested or whether or not he didn't have kids, the end result was that stuff was going to a landfill. Now it's being protected at the Atlanta History Center to be able to tell his story. And a second quick thing, that V-mail that's back there on the desk of my dad's, I donated the original to the 8th Air Force Museum down in Savannah. My dad was 8th Air Force. That was a logical place for me to donate those materials. Wouldn't have made sense at the History Center because he had no connection with Atlanta like you do. But I donated that to the 8th Air Force Museum, and out of the blue, about 5 years later, I got an email from a man in San Diego who said, "Are you the daughter of Captain Jack Hardy?" I said, "Yes." "Why?" He said, "Because your dad filmed the rescue of my dad, who was a Dutch resistance fighter during World War II on the North Sea. Did you know that?" No, I didn't have a clue. That's a piece of my dad's history that I never would have known had I not donated his materials to the museum. Because when he was looking for survivors and looking to get the rest of that story, the logical place was the 8th Air Force Museum. They put him in touch with me, and now I've got so much more about my dad's military service. So I'll submit to you, you've got a connection in Atlanta. Your things the Atlanta History Center is a logical place for those things to go. So that's what we're looking for. This is what we're hoping to do. If you've got questions, I'm back at a table there. Please stop by and chat with me. I hope that I've kind of answered some of your basic questions today. Thank you again for your service. Thank you for everything that you've done. Welcome home. And please help us tell your story. If we and you don't tell your story together, who's going to do that? Thanks.